All of the craftsmen living in a village were important in providing the necessary household goods for each family. But woodworking was a very specialized trade, one that could take years of apprenticeship to become an accomplished craftsman. Even today, the woodworking trade requires patience to master.
As an apprentice, the first couple of weeks, you maybe got a piece of wood and the boss said, "Nah, you plane this straight." And you never could get it straight because you always went down with the plane. And then took a couple of weeks till you learn even how to handle a single plane. And once you accomplished this, then something else came up, you know. So you went through the stages, and when you were watched and corrected, you know, because the journeymen, they were always around you, and you better listen. In the dark ages, you could say, well, there weren't many factories. There were factories which produced some goods, but overall, the craftsmen were an important part in their community. So that was a nice feeling, actually, because it was more personal, everything. They were in a cabinet shop. They always made chests and furniture which were made to order because somebody got married or they wanted an extra piece. But mostly those blanket chests or dowry chests, what they would call it, they were ordered if a girl maybe was confirmed or was maybe 10, 12 years old. So they figured, well, she needs a hope chest. You know? So they went to the cabinet maker, and some people were handy, they made them themselves, but not everybody. So they ordered a piece like that, and usually there was a date carved in the name, and then during the winter, people didn't have television, so they kept busy with handiwork, like the women were knitting and sewing and making blankets and spinning the wool and so forth. So that was all a purpose for that young girl when she gets married, that she has something already to good start. That was mainly the beginning, and then once they were married, some inherited a lot of things, but those who didn't, well, furniture store weren't like today, so they went to the cabinet maker or whoever craftsman was in town and they needed things according to it. That was all ordered and was made for those people. So they had something both in common, because everybody told them what they want, to a certain style or taste, you know. Everybody had a different idea. It isn't so that you will get rich with doing this, but if you like to do it and if you enjoy it, it's a satisfaction.
Even though most of the original pieces produced by our ancestors are gone, the few that remain provide inspiration to today's craftsmen who want to be a part of keeping these rich cultural traditions alive.
The fascination that I have for this stuff, and I think the boys that work here have for this, is partly a function of the fact that we had access to it. A lot of the pieces around us here, we bought the originals of, the original antiques of years and years ago when the market was a little different and this stuff was still reasonably available and reasonably priced. And what brought me to this was the ability to see if we could duplicate these things in a very authentic fashion and kind of continue to make them available to people long after the originals were off the market. Because even back then, this is 10, 12, 15 years ago, we were seeing that the originals the market was getting to the point where it was harder to find original pieces, and they were getting more and more expensive. We became so fascinated with it that we branched out beyond the things that we possessed and into things that we didn't, but always tried to keep the form. And I was very fascinated with southeastern Pennsylvania antiques, which have a tendency to have a lot of Germanic influences or Middle European influences. But what was unique about that was, no matter what the influence was, when it came to America, it was changed and Americanized to the extent that I found that the difference in form, once it had been Americanized, was far more appealing to me. And I just found that the fact that that was being done around here in this very valley, the Ole Valley is well known for a variety of craftsmen whose pieces survive in the collections of the people around here. And because that was tended to be very specific to this area as well, southeastern Pennsylvania, Lancaster County, Berks County, down into Chester County, we wanted to carry on that tradition. We wanted to continue to make these pieces available. When we first started switching over to reproductions, this business had a reputation for doing very fine woodwork. And the people that work here, I think, are probably the best of the best. And I don't say that just because they work for me. I say it because it's true. But that statement conjures up a very serious problem we had in the beginning, and that was that the serious, dedicated woodworkers we had here had a difficult time adjusting to the fact that what we were going to make wasn't going to have a perfect finish on it. It was going to be deliberately marred. It wasn't going to have a perfect edge on it. It was going to be deliberately rounded off. It wasn't going to be a perfectly smooth mirror-like surface on a table. It was going to have its imperfections. Some of them were deliberately put on it. And we went through a kind of a year, maybe year and a half struggle of wills, if you want, where we had to convince them, or I had to convince them that what we were striving for was a very positive thing, and that it had its place in the world, and that it did not compromise their woodworking integrity or their woodworking abilities. Indeed, it was adding to those, because to produce a convincing old finish takes a skill and a knowledge and an understanding beyond that of simply putting on a clear, smooth, defect-free finish. And actually, that process also took a considerable period of time till we got to the point where we felt we were competently producing an aged paint effect, or even an aged natural effect. One of the other problems we had with producing an antique-looking piece was, with the machinery that's available today, some of it tended to overdo what we wanted it to do. Our planers tended to give us a very perfect surface. Sanders today are designed to clear out all defects. And what we wanted to do was salvage some of those defects. So the boys had a little difficulty initially adjusting to the fact that they had to work with these machines to give them the effect that they wanted, and in some cases go back over them by hand. And we really talked about doing it all by hand, but we decided early on, besides the time factor involved in doing it all by hand, which would have increased the amount of time required to build any one of these pieces at least by threefold, we took a hard look at the aspect of making something and decided that creating something new today as it had been created new 200 years ago, we are taking advantage of the same modern tools and the same modern technology that's available to us today that would have been available to our predecessors 200 years ago. Whether it's the creation of the dovetail joint, the use of certain waxes and polishes to close up a finish, the increased use of certain types of planes in the old days to give them a sanded or a smooth surface. We're using the modern versions of those things. We could certainly revert to all hand tools, although I'm not sure the boys stand for that for too long. But we could certainly revert to all hand tools. But just as someone, however many years ago, used what was available to him at that time on the leading edge of development, product development, we're doing the same thing here today, with the exception of we haven't gone over to CNC equipment. We haven't gone into computer-driven equipment yet. I don't think we'll ever get to that point. I think that is too heartless for this particular kind of product. That takes almost all human contact out of the creation of something. And besides the fact that I have general philosophical objections to it, it doesn't belong in this environment. I have never been bored in this business, ever. Plus, there's a world full of interesting things out there to copy that are constantly pushing us outward for looking for new forms and new ideas, even though those ideas are 200 years old. There's lots of things I haven't thought of yet. There's lots of things we haven't come across. So we're always looking for that. And we're always pushing the envelope on the finish. We're always trying to come up with something that's a little more convincing. But that's just a personal thing around here, because once we got that competition for finish started, I don't think that'll ever come to a stop, and that's good, because this, like anything else, has to evolve. It has to move forward. We don't consider ourselves static in time on this at all. I'm not rooted to one particular notion about doing this, and I hope I never am, because when that time comes around, we will lose some of the passion for this that really makes it so special.